Yeah, my name is Bärnthaler. I'm an ecological economist at the University of Leeds, and my work broadly deals with the political economy of social ecological transformation. And I'm particularly focused on post-growth and eco-socialist approaches to navigating our current crisis. So very briefly, post-growth is about moving beyond an economic system that depends on endless economic growth and instead prioritizes human well-being and social equity within planetary boundaries. And I guess one part of my research asks how can we identify tensions, contradictions, and strategic entry points that can help us to move, starting from where we are now, toward a post-growth or eco-socialist future. And I think currently my work revolves around three interrelated areas. The first one is eco-social policy, where I think we urgently need to stop treating environmental and social policies as separate issues. So this idea that we must first kind of save the environment and only then address social issues is, I think, not only short-sighted, but also strategically dangerous because people are much more likely to support climate policies if they also deliver concrete improvements in everyday life, like affordable housing, good healthcare, secure jobs, and the like. Yet these social improvements are still often seen from a climate policy perspective as so-called co-benefits, so as kind of nice side effects to the actual climate policy rather than a central goal by themselves. Now, from a post-growth perspective, that's insufficient because the goal is not just to kind of soften the social blow of green policies, but to place social stability, well-being, and social cohesion, as well as social provisioning, care, housing, affordable energy, at the heart of social ecological transformation. So, for example, when we repurpose vacant housing and limit speculative ownership, we create affordable homes and reduce land use pressure. When we design transport systems around short distances, we cut emissions and make everyday life more accessible and affordable. And when we invest in renewable energy, we're not only reducing emissions, we are also boosting energy security, lowering living costs, and reducing dependence on fossil fuel imports. So eco-social policies are really about realizing that ecological and social goals are not in conflict. They are, in a very profound sense, actually, kind of the shared foundation of a good life for all. And that leads to a second area of interest, which is universal basic services. So universal basic services are about collectively providing essential services like housing, healthcare, transport, education on a decommodified and universal basis, where access is based on need and not on the ability to pay. And this goes beyond redistribution through cash transfers, like, for example, universal basic income, because universal basic services address the much deeper question of who provides what, how, under what conditions, and for whom, and also who decides what is provided. And why does this matter? Because in most OECD countries, lower income households spend around 2/3 of their income on basic services. Now, that means that universal basic services speak to material needs. They help to reduce inequality, but they can also meet people's needs with significantly less energy through collective provisioning. And there's growing evidence in this. And again, a key point here is that we can't just redistribute purchasing power. We have to rethink the systems that organize provisioning in itself. Otherwise, we will leave the structural tendencies of capitalism towards overproduction, commodification, financialization, exploitation largely untouched. Still, even though collective provisioning and universal access to essential services are critical components in reducing our overall energy and resource use, while securing well-being, I think more is needed, especially in a world where geopolitical tensions are reshaping the very foundations of global supply chains. And that leads to my third area of interest, which are sufficiency strategies, especially in the context of geopolitical tensions. Because it's clear that we will need a substantial expansion of renewable energies, solar, wind, etc. But the more energy we use, the more infrastructure and the more resources for these technologies we will need, and the more societal resistance we will also encounter. And all serious climate neutrality scenarios that do not rely on high risk and highly speculative technologies include not just green tech, but also what we call demand side reductions, that is sufficiency. So more public transport, less car use, more regional and plant-based agriculture, less meat production, more retrofitting, less new construction, more repair and more reuse, less throwaway culture. And again, these are not just climate strategies, but these are also security strategies, because our current model depends on extracting massive amounts of critical raw materials from regions that are increasingly pushing back, rightly so, to seek sovereignty over their resources. And we currently see this playing out in real time, right? Countries like Argentina, Bolivia, Chile are joining forces to take more control over their lithium reserves. Others like Indonesia and Democratic Republic of Congo and China are restricting exports of key materials. And the point here is that these are not kind of isolated events. They reflect a broader shift where resource-rich countries are rightly asserting sovereignty and reshaping global power dynamics as Western influence declines. And in addition to that, as the European Union now also aims to onshore critical raw material extraction through the Critical Raw Material Act, for example, it also risks replicating colonial patterns, and this time, however, within its own territory between Europe's core and Europe's periphery. So we have especially rural and indigenous communities like the Sami in Northern Europe that are particularly at risk, but so are also parts of Europe's periphery, like Serbia and Portugal, where mining projects are already facing local resistance. And now, historically, the European Union outsourced much of its environmental harm and labor exploitation to the global south. But now this dynamic is also returning, what Mrs. Serre once called the boomerang of colonial relation. Today, it's coming back in the form of weaker environmental protections, shorter public consultations, and even increased repression to extract more and more critical materials from Europe's periphery. And these tensions internationally and within Europe are likely to escalate, not fade. And this is not to say that we shouldn't, onshore critical raw material extraction, but it will create increasing tensions and won't achieve strategic autonomy if we assume a continuous and sharp increase in the demand for such materials. And at the core of this is a real paradox. We often justify economic growth in the name of security. But the more we chase growth, the more resources we need, and that actually makes us more vulnerable and not more secure. And recent studies even show that Europe could halve its energy use by 2050 without sacrificing basic quality of life if we pair efficiency with sufficiency and tackle unnecessary overproduction and overconsumption heads on. So in short, post-growth isn't just an environmental necessity, it's a path toward real sovereignty, strategic autonomy, resilience, and shared well-being. And yet, whenever we talk about these kinds of transformations, about reducing energy demand, reshaping provisioning systems, or confronting structural inequalities, one objection often comes up quickly, which is, but there is no societal acceptance for that. And I think we really need to challenge this idea, because when people say there is no societal acceptance, it often sounds like acceptance is something fixed, something static, almost like a law of nature. But that's not how societies work, because societal acceptance is not just something that is, but it's something that is created. And it's shaped by how we, for example, communicate political visions. Why are we making these changes? What are we aiming for? Whether it's energy security or strategic autonomy. And it depends on how these visions are conveyed through political parties, through media and the like, clearly, accessibly, and with a sense of direction. And it also depends on whether people are genuinely included in the process through real democratic participation, not just symbolic consultation. Now, if these conditions are in place, societal acceptance can actually shift, and often much faster than we think. I think that's it. Thanks.